Welcome to the Bookman's Corner. I'm Lois Lindstrom. Curious about something? Google it. Look it up. Ask a question. But is curiosity simply information seeking? The book that we're going to be talking about today is Curious Minds and was written by Perry Zurn and his sister, Danielle Bassett, who are identical twins and both are college professors. Joining us today is author Perry Zurn. Thanks for being on our show, Perry.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Professor Zurn is an assistant professor of philosophy at American University in Washington, D.C., and is the author of the book Curiosity and Power, The Politics of Inquiry. His sister and co-writer and twin is Danielle Bassett, a professor of bioengineering at the University of Pennsylvania. They have authored more than 300 scientific articles. Their book was noted by Publishers Weekly as one of the top scientific books out this fall. So I'm so excited you're here. And I just was curious about your background. I noticed in the preface that you and your identical twin were homeschooled in the foothills of the Allegheny Mountains, and you embraced nature and books. How did you and your sister decide to write a book together on curiosity only a few years ago?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good question. I think that we were both really curious kids. We did a lot of exploring, and we were encouraged to do so by our parents. We loved school, but we also loved to be outside. Growing up as twins, we needed to distinguish ourselves a little bit. So I went into philosophy and Dani went into physics. But at some point we realized, you know what, we can both talk about the mind together because that is something in between what we study. And that was just about 5 years ago. We started talking about curiosity and writing a book together. And this is what has come about.
Oh, fantastic. And it's a great read. Well, Perry, give us a quick review of your educational background.
Sure. So I have my PhD in philosophy. I also have a master's and a BA in philosophy. And then I did a postdoc at University of Pennsylvania in curiosity and curiosity studies. So I've been stuck in philosophy for a long time, but I love the field because it really lets you explore almost any subject and read very, very widely. And the task of philosophy is simply to pause and to say, well, do we really understand this? Maybe we don't. And if we don't, then let's kind of dig in a little further. And that's what we do with curiosity here.
Yes.
Do we really understand curiosity? Maybe not. Let's dig in further.
Oh, it's very interesting. And then, of course, your book is subtitled The Power of Connection. How does that connect with curiosity, the power of connection?
Sure. Well, most people think about curiosity as the capacity to grasp something, to learn something, to get knowledge. And we think that's a useful way of understanding curiosity sometimes, right? If you Google something, you do look it up and you gain knowledge.
Sure.
But we think there's something more fundamentally true about curiosity, and that is that curiosity connects ideas to ideas, or what I already know with what I could know. And it connects me to my world, and it connects me to other people around me. And so we really think that curiosity is a capacity for connection more than it is for sort of grasping.
Very interesting. Now, in your book, you propose there are three main kinds of curiosity. What are they?
Sure. So the first is the busybody. The busybody loves to learn about all sorts of things. They listen widely. They usually have 100 tabs or 30 tabs open on their computer or on their phone. Busybody loves to learn about a lot of things. The hunter is a second sort, and they're really focused. They have one or two things they want to know about, one or two things they really like to talk about, and that's about it. And then the third sort is the dancer. The dancer is someone who's incredibly imaginative and creative. And one of the things that they do when they're curious is they put two things together that weren't together to begin with. They say, what if we think these two things together? Then what happens to my world?
Now, what type are you?
That's a great question. I go back and forth on this, and I'd love to know which type you are. But I mean, I think that in one sense, all of these are true of me at different points in even in my day, but certainly in my life.
Okay.
I think when you get to start off in your field or your career, you're often more of the busybody. You have to learn a lot of things in order to get to know a field, but then you got to focus and you got to develop expertise in a particular area.
Right.
That's more like the hunter. And then you have the chance to be really creative and to do something unexpected in that area, and that's the dancer.
Well, I would say I'm the same way, all three. What are the most curious animals in the universe besides humans? This was in your book.
An impossible question. The most curious. I mean, we do have, toward the end of the book, we do have a series of animals that we pause over when we say, animals are incredibly curious. Insects are curious. Every being in the world is busy exploring the world with us.
Yes.
And so what can we learn from the way they explore the world and sort of take home for us as a way for us to explore our own worlds? So we talk about, the rabbit, right? We talk about rabbit holes, diving down a rabbit hole as part of humans being curious. Well, what even is a rabbit hole? What are rabbits doing in their holes? And what might that tell us about curiosity?
That's right. That's right. Well, let's discuss things like Google, iPhones, and social media. Are they making us more curious, or are they killing curiosity?
I mean, this is such a topical question. I think a lot of people are rightly sort of afraid of the effects of technology right now. I would say that Google, iPhones, etc., social media, these things can be used for good or for ill, really. But I think the problem is less the media itself than it is the fact that we constantly sort of pull our phones up and are just kind of stuck to them, and we don't get a break. One of the really important things about a curious mind and a creative mind is that it gets breaks, and it's in those breaks that can start to kind of thread together what it's learning, and it can create new ideas.
So the problem is it's the constant connection to the phone that's the problem, because people just are always on their phone, right?
Right. So it's not the phone itself, but it's the constant connection to it. Right?
So they need to take a break. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
We know some children are very curious, but they lack discipline sometimes. How do you manage a curious child who can be a bit rebellious?
Oh, that's a good question.
And you have a child, don't you?
Right. He's not particularly rebellious, but he is
Curious.
He is very curious, yes. And I think it's important to encourage curiosity in children and to make them feel like the world is there for them to explore in a safe environment. So I don't know. I think the rebellious kid is one thing, and then the more conscientious and sort of reserved kid is a different thing. And we need different tools to facilitate curiosity in both of these sorts of children. And I think education is one of these places where we can do that, right?
Yes.
We can give different tools to different sorts of students to say, you know what, this is your tendency and these are your capacities for curiosity. Let's build on that.
So it's a matter of observation and then implementing new strategies? Is that what you think is what we should be done?
Yeah, and paying attention to how their curiosity already works and figuring how can I build on that, rather than telling them, oh, don't do that, do it this way.
Okay.
That doesn't really work.
Okay, interesting. Now, you and your co-author both have children. I mean, how do you encourage curiosity with your own kids?
Yeah, for myself, it's really about getting outside. I think,
Okay.
well, at this point, my little one can't read, right? He's a little bit too young. So the outside world is one of the places where he can explore the most and see the most different things.
Play in the grass. Play
in the grass, yeah. I mean, just observing the bees, right? Sometimes we just chase bees. We chase butterflies.
Yes.
And the things that you can come to learn about the world by paying attention and staying attuned to something.
Yeah, nature's so wonderful.
Yeah.
I agree. Well, can you tell us about the role of curiosity in the workplace?
Sure. I think that so many workplaces do not encourage curiosity.
Why is that? Why don't they?
Yeah, I think that there are certain expectations of you do this job and you do it over and over and over and over again, and that's it. And I don't think employers are always willing to open up your job description to things that you might want to do, that might really excite you, and that you may have grown in your capacity to engage in. So I think that we need more flexibility in job descriptions themselves, and also their capacity to change and to shift.
Yes, I think that's so important in today's world, so important. How can you promote network structure and project goals in the workplace? That's also very tough, to get people to agree on a goal and agree on and have a certain structure.
Yeah, you know what? I think this is different for different companies.
Okay.
So I think if we're talking about a network structure within a business, part of the question is, what is it that we want to do together? And there needs to be buy-in all the way across. And then how do we want to organize ourselves to get that done? And then maybe we decide, you know what, we need to reorganize. And that should be able to come from the bottom up as much as the top down. And we need to be open to that.
Okay. Curiosity, is it as important in the arts as it is in the sciences? I mean, which is more vital?
I think it's the bedrock of both, right? I think that curiosity allows us to create arts that are passionate, changing, flexible to our current environment, and really speak to us today. And it's also the foundation of all science. All data collection, observation, experimentation, inference, etc. So we need it for everything.
We do need it, don't we? It's so vital for both the arts and the sciences. Well, in your view, who would be in a Curiosity Hall of Fame if it existed?
I mean, the answer for me changes almost daily because I think that there are so many people who are models of curiosity. And I can think of my parents, I can think of my grandparents, I can think of my siblings. I think the more we become attuned to what curiosity looks like, we start to see it in more people.
What about famous people or politicians, or do you have any names that
Sure.
you could throw out?
One of the first that comes to mind is Leonardo da Vinci. Most people know this name, somebody who's a Renaissance man who did a lot of physics and art. And
Yes, he is. I've got a follow-up question about him. So
okay, great. So Leonardo da Vinci, certainly, but then, folks like Gloria Anzaldúa, who's a Chicana feminist writing in the 80s and 90s, and who just really, she lived on the border of Mexico and the US, and just really questioned deeply what it meant to be someone who lives on the border of a variety of different identities and of states and countries.
And she was very well received then, right?
Extremely, yes. Her books went into the billions of
Isn't that
sales.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing because it's, I guess, it not been done before, right?
Yeah.
Now, you wrote that the Christian Bible, in the Christian Bible, the book of Genesis begins with the story of creation and curiosity. And the first woman, Eve, wants to partake of the fruit from the one tree that is forbidden to her. Curious to know good and evil, she reaches out and consumes a single piece of fruit from the forbidden tree. Why did you include this example of curiosity in your book?
This is one of the most common stories, the most widely shared stories of curiosity. And I think it's interesting because it characterizes curiosity as dangerous.
Yes,
right?
Very dangerous, yeah.
Yeah, it is the key moment in which the whole of humankind falls into sin.
That's right, that's right. Bad news, that's right.
Right, and this is what Jesus is required to save us from, is this moment of curiosity. And I think it's interesting, there's a lot written about it being specifically a woman who
partakes
and then draws down all of humanity. But I think what's important is to notice that curiosity might very well be something quite different, which is the question of what if. And just because God or somebody else said, don't touch that thing, maybe I need to make my own decision. And maybe I need to ask, what if I do want to explore this particular tree?
So it's a free will thing, right?
I think so, yeah, I think so.
You wrote that curious people are often innovative people who have the capacity to be world changers. In what way should we do more to promote curiosity in schools?
I think we need to do a lot more because I think in schools, most of the ways we think about curiosity is, does the student ask a lot of questions? Do they raise their hand a lot? And do they sit in the front, right?
Right.
And
those are the best students, of course.
Well, I mean, that's the perception, right? But I think that there are other folks there who are incredibly curious, but we miss out on noticing them because they're not performing the same kind of curiosity we expect.
You think that because they're shy or they don't want to draw attention to themselves? Or
Yeah, for all kinds of reasons. I think some students aren't that kind of front-runner kind of vision. And I think that we as educators really need to notice the different ways in which students are curious.
Okay. Now, how can one consciously practice curiosity?
I think there are all kinds of ways. Once you start asking, you could begin by asking, how do I already practice curiosity? You might think that you Google some things, but then, you also call up a friend, ask a question, or work through a work problem. Or maybe you journal a bit to decide how you want to make a big life decision, right? I think you actually already involve a lot of different practices of curiosity in your life, and partly we just need to notice them and then lean into them more.
To be more aware of what we're doing to promote curiosity in our own lives, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And it can be just as simple as picking up the phone and calling a friend, right?
Yeah.
And saying, how are you? What's going on, right? I found it interesting to read that there is this was fascinating in your book, there is an annual international competition called Dance Your PhDs, which is run by the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences and Sciences magazine. And this contest challenges scientists working in biology, chemistry, physics, etc., to explain their PhD research through interpretive dance. I mean, did you ever enter this contest or know someone who did? And can you describe the music that they use?
You know, there's all sorts of kind of music. I have not done it myself, nor do I know someone personally, but I do know, or I'm adjacent to some of the folks who've done this. And, you know, there's hip hop, there's jazz, I mean, there's all sorts of kinds of music. And students really, PhD students dance. They dance in their labs, and they communicate what it is that they discovered in their research. It is absolutely fabulous. Go to YouTube, Google Dance Your PhD, you'll have a wonderful evening.
Oh my gosh, it's right there on Google. Fantastic. Now, what can educators do to encourage young children in curiosity, your kindergartners? What can they do with kindergartners? You think it's to take them outside or maybe have them play with blocks, or what kind of?
Yeah, I still think one of the things we need to do is to be open to how the student is already showing curiosity. So we need to get to know our students a little bit better, rather than bringing in some kind of lesson we decide that they need to learn. A lot of it is becoming more attuned as educators to the students and what lights their eyes, right? When are their eyes lit? And then let's follow that out. Let's build more of that into the curriculum.
Okay, whether it's coloring books or building blocks or whatever it is that makes them excited, right?
Exactly.
Now, as a child, I loved the NASA space program because it seemed to be, it's the next frontier for mankind. Were you impressed with space exploration when you were young?
Yeah, who wasn't? I mean, it's, I think about it even today, just the fact that we're a tiny speck of matter in the largest possible conception of space. And what are we even doing here? And what does that mean about the meaning of how we spend our time here? It's wild. And I respect astronomers incredibly. And I think this is a key point of curiosity for people of almost any age.
Yes, and that's why the space program, I'm so glad, is still active, and they're going to be taking off, I think, pretty soon to the moon.
Right.
Well, give us examples of people who have taken big leaps in terms of creative imagination.
I think what's really powerful is for people to reflect on their own life and the people that they've known and think about the kind of imagination that has allowed the world itself around us to exist as it does already. Every day you get in your car, think about the imagination it took to make that.
Yes.
Or every day you get on the train. Or you walk along a sidewalk, right? Do you ever wonder about what makes a sidewalk? How, what is actually the molecular structure of a sidewalk? I mean, we are surrounded by the evidence of imagination and innovation, and every step should be inspiring in that sense.
Oh, very good, very good. Well, it seems that there's been a big leap of scientific exploration of the human mind this century. And do you agree? And what have you read about the human brain that has impressed you?
The human brain is still a mystery in some fundamental way, and it probably always will be. But there have been...
Why will it always be?
I think that the world itself is so much bigger than we can understand. And that's exciting. That's part of what brings us into sciences and beyond. But what has been a huge leap in contemporary science of the mind lately is that we no longer think of the mind as built of different sections that do specific things, right? So there's the motor cortex or something that simply governs how it is that we move. Instead, now we understand that it's a symphony. It's all of these parts that talk to one another constantly and integrate their messages with one another and sometimes take turns doing each other's jobs, right? There's some community level work happening in your mind all the time.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing. And in chapter 6, you write about some of the world's great thinkers that were people who walked and who went walking and thought great thoughts while they walked. Tell us about Socrates and Plato and the walking around that they did.
Sure. I mean, this is one of the earliest moments in philosophy, but also in sort of academic thought in general, and trying to understand the world. Socrates and Plato are ancient philosophers, and they walked in order to think.
Yes.
And many, many people have walked in order to think. And that walk can be in a wheelchair or not, it can be with a mobility device or not, right? But simply moving in some sense, moving in our world, always tends to produce greater and deeper thoughts.
But then Socrates, he did stop and lecture occasionally, didn't he? And so did Plato. They would stop, and their followers would stop walking, and they would tell them, well, this is what I'm thinking, right?
Sure, that happened, as well as sort of exploring things as they walked. I mean, both things occurred. And I think that pattern, we can see that pattern in environmentalists and naturalists as well, who really went out and walked in wilderness spaces and came to think about what is this land and what is this earth and how do we value it.
Can you tell us briefly, how is the brain organized?
Sure. Well, the brain is organized, at least, of neurons.
Neurons.
Neurons are little pieces of matter that send messaging signals throughout the brain.
Okay.
So it's a big communication hub, is what the brain is.
And it's so tiny, though.
It is so tiny. It's true. But in this constant messaging system, again, there are sections that have primary jobs, but they are really held loosely. And especially if you injure one area, other parts of the brain can really take over.
Wow, wow. That's so great. I read with interest how scholars who study curiosity have paid remarkable little attention to neurotypical learning with students with a range of learning differences from dyslexia to autism to anxiety, depression, and bipolar disorder. You write that so much can be done to understand and celebrate the often non-standard ways curiosity is expressed. Can you tell us more?
Sure. So in the book, we really argue that curiosity is a pattern of connection. It's a way in which we connect ideas. If you are neuroatypical, you connect ideas differently. You hold them in a different configuration, a different architecture. And what we need to do is have room for those different architectures. Typically, I think education, workplaces, etc., really privilege certain ways of connecting information and holding information and expressing knowledge. We need to expand that.
We definitely do, because there are so many autistic children, but they're so bright and capable, and yet they're somehow pushed off to the side. And it seems like the society just doesn't welcome them at all. They're just sort of there's like a deep hole there. I don't know.
Yeah, and there's just not a lot of scholarship done on curiosity and autism, and there needs to be. So one of the people I cite here often is Christy Johnson, who was working at MIT and is now at Harvard. But this is an incredibly important area to focus on.
Very, very important. And you also, and then my favorite is you wrote that Leonardo da Vinci is repeatedly celebrated as one of the most curious minds to ever have existed. Can you tell us why da Vinci was such a superstar from this perspective of curious minds?
Yeah. Partly because he was not restrained to any particular field or discipline or question.
Okay.
He was so curious that he could stretch well beyond any one place or any one thing he thought he knew. He was very experimental. He was driven by a lot of sort of dreams of what might be possible. You know, people saw his sketches and he imagined engineering things that happened, centuries later.
I mean, like what? Like, can you give us an example?
Some kind of flying contraption was one of them,
Okay.
And, I think his capacity to imaginatively risk, and then to think really broadly across different fields, that's what characterized his curiosity.
And of course, is an incredible an incredible artist.
Exactly.
Incredible. Well, will you be writing other scientific books in the future?
Yes, Dani and I have many plans to write future books. We're working on one right now in which we focus on the hippocampus, which is one of the sections in the brain that helps us navigate space. So it helps us remember directions to the place where we're going. But it also helps us remember relationships between concepts. So the reason why I know, for example, that the color red is close to the fruit raspberry, that's because of the hippocampus. So we're writing a book about navigating space and navigating concepts together.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, I hope you come back. And where can our viewers find your book to purchase it?
Feel free to go on any site that you typically buy your books. Go to your local library, go to your local bookstore. Feel free to look at perryzurn.com if you want to know more about my work, or Google Dani Bassett's lab to know more about their work.
Well, I have to say I'm so glad that you came to our studio today, Perry. And you are a superstar in my mind to write this book and to bring out the important concepts of why curiosity is so important to embrace. And this book is a real eye-opener. Thank you for sharing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching. Please join us again next month for a new edition of the Bookman's Corner. I'm Lois Lindstrom.